Thank you, Dr. Jacob, for giving this opportunity. My talk is on left atrial anatomy. Left atrium is a hidden chamber. It's a posteriormost chamber, but it has many roles to play. Even though it's a hidden chamber, but it's a dynamic chamber. It's a volume sensor. 1/3 of the cardiac output is contributed by left atrium. It's a barometer of the diastolic function of the heart. It modulates LV filling and secretes atrial natriuretic peptide, communicates with renin-angiotensin-aldosterone pathway. It's a prognostic biomarker for cardiovascular disease. It's a A1C of the heart. How HbA1c predicts diabetic status of the patient. By looking at left atrium, we can predict the cardiac status of the patient. So how left atrium is a hidden one, but plays many roles, major roles in the cardiac function. So before Jacob was telling how morphology is important, many complex congenital heart diseases, dextrocardias, dextroposition, and other discordance, the chambers may be placed in different places. Only the morphology will help us to identify this is left atrium or right atrium, right ventricle or left ventricle, not the site. Left atrium is identified by the morphology it has. But only, see, in right atrium, there are many things to say this is right atrium. Like that, in the left atrium, what are the morphological features to say it's a morphological left atrium? Left atrial wall is smooth, unlike right atrium. Left atrial appendage, the shape of the left atrial appendage is different from the right atrial appendage. It's a long, tubular, slender, finger-like with narrow base. The pectinate muscles in the left atrial appendage is only in left atrial appendage, not into the body of the left atrium. The left atrial body is very smooth one. Very important one is the presence of fossa lunata, the flap valve of fossa ovalis, the counterpart of the fossa ovalis in the right atrium. That decides this chamber is the left atrium. On seeing the anatomical position, the left atrium is not at all visible. Only the left atrial appendage is visible. So it's a true posterior chamber, as I told. This left atrial appendage only projects anteriorly. The left atrium drains the pulmonary veins in the posterior aspect. Left pulmonary veins are placed superiorly than the right pulmonary veins. So how posteriorly it's wedged between the pulmonary vessels, and below that you are seeing the coronary sulcus lodging the coronary sinus. So in anatomy, it's a left atrium is a quadrangular chamber. It's a posteriorly situated chamber. Forms 2/3 of the base of the heart. It contributes the greater part of the upper border of the heart. Small contribution to the sternocostal surface, left surface, and the left border of the heart. This all the three mainly by the left atrial appendage. Here you can see how left atrium is posteriormost. It's almost close to esophagus, and you are seeing the descending aorta and close to that vertebra. So it's a very posteriormost chamber. The measurements, the dimensions, previously we were measuring, it's enlarged, it's a giant left atrium. Nowadays, the dimensions not given any importance. By measuring, the enlargement of the left atrium occurs in different dimensions. Asymmetrical enlargement is very common. That's why the dimensions not taken into account. should be measured in major axis and minor axis. When indexed to body surface area in major axis, it should be around 2.3 to 3.5 centimeters. In minor, it's 1.6 to 2.4 centimeters. The enlargement of left atrium is frequently asked questions during the rounds by the faculties, the assistant professors or professors. We have to be able to answer 10 points. How the left atrial enlargement is identified in the plain X-ray chest PA view. Here I have shown few points. The left main bronchus is pushed up and widens the cardinal angle more than 75 degrees. And the left atrial enlargement causes the straightening of the left heart border, and the concavity below the pulmonary trunk is obliterated, and the enlargement is more towards the right side, posterior to the right atrium, comes and even forms right heart border, even goes beyond that, produces shadow and shadow appearance. The inferior enlargement is very much restricted, it's very rare, so because of the placement of the diaphragm. This is one interesting sign because of the enlargement of the left atrium, that pushing of the left main bronchus causes Volkmann sign. On seeing the parasternal long axis view, just by looking at aorta and the left atrium, comparing the size, we can say this patient is having normal left atrium or not. 2 to 4 centimeters we say. So on seeing just with the single click, we can say the left atrium is normal for this patient. Now volume is given more importance. It's a very important robust cardiovascular risk factor. Previously it was told 24 to 26 ml. Now it's even increased to 34 ml per square meter body surface area. It's a normal volume for the patient. There are 3 volumes. During pre-atrial contractions, having reservoir volume. During the closure of the mitral valve, we are getting minimal left atrial volume. Just before the opening of the mitral valve, you have maximum LA volume. The compliance of the left atrium is decided how much is emptied from the left atrium. V max minus V minimum divided by V minimum. It's a volume sensor. It's a prognostic biomarker for the cardiovascular diseases. Previously, the size of the left atrium, with that we were differentiating, this is mild enlargement, moderate enlargement, severe enlargement. Nowadays, with the volume, it's classified. It's a mild enlargement, moderate enlargement, severe enlargement. It's less than 34 ml is normal. If it goes up to 41 ml, it's called mild enlargement of the left atrium. The moderate up to 48 ml, severe, it's more than 48. It's body surface area. It's indexed to body surface area. When the patient is having the volume of more than 130 ml, that's the whole volume. He is prone for all cardiovascular thromboembolic complications. So this volume is taken into account nowadays. Before the enlargement of the chamber occurs, before you can see visually the enlargement, the volume increases. That only stretches the chamber to enlarge in size. Once it goes for stretching, the normal myocytes replaced by the fibrous tissue and loses its compliance, and the contractility and the cardiac output contribution and stasis, all complications simultaneously will occur. So how this axis calculated in echo, with that the volume is calculated. Next is the thickness of the left atrium. This is not uniform in all areas. The superior wall little bit thicker than the other parts. It's around 3.5 to 6.5 mm. In comparing with the right atrium, definitely the left atrium is superior. And the thickness is little bit more than that right atrium. The anterior wall just behind the aorta is usually the thinnest area in the left atrium. As a surgeons, when we go around in aorta, we may perforate. So we have to be very careful. Just behind the ascending aorta, the area of left atrium is very thin. That's called even unprotected area. The posterior wall where the pulmonary veins open, that there also you get thin left atrial wall. And the area just in front of esophagus is also very thin. The vestibular area, that is the outflow part of the left atrium, the portion surrounds the mitral valve is also very thin area. That's called the vestibule of the mitral valve. That thickness is only 2 mm. Here the transillumination shows how non-uniform thickness of the left atrium. Few areas is very much illuminated, few areas showing thick muscle bundles. This shows non-uniform myocardial thickness. Relations. Anteriorly, when Jacob was showing in the specimen, you are seeing very well the great arterial trunks anteriorly. Below that, you are having transverse sinus. Posterior to that, posterior to the left atrium, tracheal bifurcation, esophagus, descending aorta, and vertebral column. There are two sinuses, one in the front, one at the back. Both sinuses help to accommodate the enlargement of the left atrium. When it enlarges more than that, it can compress on trachea, esophagus, and recurrent laryngeal nerve causes the symptoms. So here, the transverse sinus between the great arterial trunks and the left atrium. Here is oblique sinus behind the left atrium in front of the pulmonary veins. This is called a cul-de-sac. Any collections can accumulate. It's a dependent portion of the heart. Walls, there are 5 walls for the left atrium. Superior wall, this forms roof, and posterior wall, that portion related to pulmonary veins and esophagus. Left lateral wall related to left atrial appendage. The medial wall and anterior wall all contributed by the interatrial septum. Here shown the superior wall is related to right pulmonary artery. The right pulmonary artery is sitting over the superior wall of the left atrium. Left pulmonary artery is close to left superior pulmonary vein. Right superior pulmonary vein is related to SVC. The septal wall is a very important anatomical structure. This categorizes morphological left atrium with the presence of the flap valve of the fossa ovalis are called fossa lunata. This anatomy, we have to be very thorough while doing transseptal puncture. Here the relations shown, the esophagus posterior to left atrium and comes next descending aorta. The right phrenic nerve, it's related to superior vena cava. The left phrenic nerve, it's a very important anatomical structure in relation with left atrial appendage. While doing redo surgeries, it's very difficult to identify the part and each and everything of the structures of the heart. This tracing the nerves will help you. By tracing the right phrenic nerve, you can find out SVC. By tracing the left phrenic nerve, you can be very close to left atrial appendage. So again, I want to insist the relationship of the aorta and the esophagus with the left atrium, how the anterior wall in relation with the aorta is very thin, it's an unprotected area. The posteriorly close to esophagus is also very thin. So the cardiologist doing ablation procedures in these areas, they have to be very careful. Too much charring will perforate the heart. Here the relation of the left phrenic nerve to left atrial appendage is shown, but it's not always anterior, can go lateral or it even goes inferiorly. But this definitely will help to find out the left atrial appendage position. Internal features, again I want to say it's a very smooth structure. No pectinate muscle seen in the body of the left atrium, and the interatrial septum, the left side with fossa lunata, the flap valve of the fossa ovalis is a very important anatomical determinant in the interior of the left atrium. There are 4 components of the left atrium. One is septal component, another one is smooth venous component, another one is left atrial appendage, finally the vestibule, the outlet portion of the left atrium that's surrounding the mitral valve. So here all 4 components are shown. This is the septal component, this is the venous component, this is the vestibule of the mitral valve, then you have the left atrial appendage. And the interior looks very smooth with the openings of the pulmonary veins and the mitral valve. This ridge is very important for the cardiologist. After that I will discuss. There are pulmonary veins opening, the orifice of the left atrial appendage. This ridge is called left lateral ridge, Coumadin ridge, Marshall ridge, many names for that. So this septal aspect of the flap valve of the fossa ovalis differentiates the left atrium from the right atrium. While doing transseptal puncture, This true septum knowledge to be kept in mind. Should not go above or below. Should be at the site of fossa ovalis. Otherwise, will exit the heart. May perforate pulmonary veins or aorta. Will go out of the heart. So this area is the true septal area. The puncture can be done only in these areas, not here or here. The right pulmonary veins, it's very close to the interatrial septal plane. The lateral walls later to left atrial appendage, the posterior walls later to the pulmonary veins and esophagus and descending aorta. All anatomical structures surrounding the left atrium you can see in single cuts, posteriorly later to esophagus and aorta, right superior pulmonary vein, right side with the superior vena cava relation. Left atrial appendage is close to left superior pulmonary vein. Here it comes the pulmonary artery. The functions of the left atrium also to be remembered. Not only it's a conduit, it has reservoir function. Atrial kit contributes 25% of the cardiac output. That's why in cases of HOCM, LV is very stiff. The patient develops atrial fibrillation, that's all, his life is gone. Because the LV function is out, the contribution to cardiac output drastically will come down, the sudden death can occur. The pulmonary vein orifices and its courses and the distance between the pulmonary vein orifices, all very important. Those doing pulmonary vein ablation procedures, the distance between the orifices of the right pulmonary veins ranges from 3 to 14 mm. Between the left pulmonary veins, 2 to 16 mm. The diameter of the orifices vary from 8 to 21 mm. This image shows how right pulmonary veins close to each other and left pulmonary veins little away from each other. And this anatomy is very important. Even if you are not able to detect any echo or other means, better go for even MDCT before going pulmonary vein ablation. Some people will have anomalous pulmonary vein drainage. Some will have 3 pulmonary veins right side. Some will have joined pulmonary vein, conjoined pulmonary veins. This image shows how right superior pulmonary vein is related to superior vena cava. Left superior pulmonary vein is related to left atrial appendage. The myocardial sleeve, it's very important terminology. This is the extension of the left atrial myocardial fibers into the pulmonary veins for some distance. It goes even up to 1 to 3 centimeters. The thickness varies in different places. To start with, may be thick and tapers distally. The thickness is more in the inferior wall of the superior pulmonary veins and the superior wall of the inferior pulmonary veins. It possesses specialized conduction tissue and also has pacemaker activity. See here you are seeing myocardial sleeve. The inferior wall has more amount. It goes 1 to 3 centimeters into the pulmonary veins. It has P cells, transitional cells, Purkinje cells. All will trigger the cardiac activity and precipitate arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation. There is one extra anatomic component. I already told the pectinate muscles confined only to the left atrial appendage. Some people, the autopsy, 28% of the hearts depicted the presence of the pectinate muscles extra appendageally. So it's called extra appendageal pectinate muscles. The blood supply to the heart is very well shown by the Dr. Jacob James Raj, very clearly with all branches. Left circumflex artery is closely related to the left atrium, that also supplies left atrium. This anatomy is also very important for the cardiologist when they go for device closure of the left atrial appendage. If it's the bigger size is placed, the circumflex artery is close to that, can compress on that. It can even compress on the left superior pulmonary vein. So this anatomy to be remembered. For the surgeons, it's near the root of the left atrial appendage. While doing CMC or any other taking bites, we have to be even doing ligation. We have to be very careful. We should not injure the circumflex. Venous drainage is by the oblique vein of Marshall and small veins, venae caudate minimi. The embryological aspect of the oblique vein is very important. The left common cardinal vein that gives to oblique vein of the left atrium. Here it comes oblique vein that joins with the coronary sinus. In the specimen, you can see how the oblique vein of Marshall is coming close to left atrial appendage. Somewhere here is circumflex. This is one important anatomical structure seen in the left atrium that's called subepicardial Bachmann's bundle. This is the conduction bundles. This starts from the right atrial appendage, crosses the interatrial septum, comes to left atrium, bifurcates into anterior and posterior trunk, encircles the left atrial appendage. Here you are seeing how it comes and goes and encircles the left. Here it bifurcates and encircles the left atrial appendage. This only gives thickness for the left atrium. Left lateral ridge. This is one important anatomical component seen within the left atrium. This lies close proximity to the left superior and inferior pulmonary veins. Separates these two veins from the arch of the left atrial appendage. This is some of the names I told, no, Marshall ridge and the Coumadin ridge. The thickness is different in different individuals. Normally it's around 5 mm. It tapers, thins out on the edge, on either side. If it is too much thick also, it's difficult for the cardiologist to place their catheter. It's small, very thin, they'll have difficulty. They'll have unstable catheter position. So that optimum size is needed. The ridge should not be too big. It should not be thinned out. The developmentally, the left atrium is from the primitive left atrial chamber, left half. It's only the left atrial appendage develops from the primitive atrium. And also the left half of the atrioventricular canal, the smooth part is from the absorption of the pulmonary veins. Here, the primitive left atrium gives rise to tuberculated part of the left atrium. Other smooth parts from the primitive pulmonary veins. Evagination of the veins causes the development of the smooth part. So embryologically, on the day of 28, only the embryological pulmonary vein, single orifice seen in the left atrium. It comes in and becomes 2 orifices at the day of 3 and becomes 4 and gives rise to this much of development of the smooth part of the left atrium. So when comparing with the right atrium, the rough part here is only the left atrial appendage and the smooth part is from the pulmonary veins here in left atrium. The right side is from the right horn of the sinus venosus. So another important component of the left atrium, it should not be missed or neglected, is the left atrial appendage. It's a critical lethal structure and has the function to perform endocrine function, atrial natriuretic peptide. That's why if any exclusion procedure is done, the people will have more failure symptoms because of the absence of the ANP secretion and the diuretic function. So how the left atrial appendage is seen? When comparing with the right atrial appendage, it's smaller in size. The pectinate muscles confined to above the arch, the ridge of Marshall. This is the ridge, left lateral ridge, the ridge of Marshall. Separates the left atrial appendage arch from the left superior and inferior pulmonary ostia. This has the length of 16 to 51 mm. It has some volume. And the volume increases whenever left atrium enlarges, left atrial appendage also increases in size, the volume increases. When it goes beyond 25 ml, these people are prone for thrombus formation and other thromboembolic complications. The orifice diameter is also very important, 5 to 27 mm. When it goes beyond that, it's 28 mm. It's difficult for the cardiologist to place the device, occlusion device, because if it's a smaller device, it can get embolized. It's a bigger one, can compress on circumflex or superior pulmonary vein. So they have to study in detail all aspects, how the diameter of the left atrium, what is the morphology, what is the length of the left atrial appendage, depth of the left atrial appendage, everything to be studied before selecting the procedures. Left atrial appendage with the shapes is classified into 4: chicken wing, windsock, cauliflower, cactus. Very common one is chicken wing. It's a proximal, it has one dominant proximal part lobe. Windsock, main lobe sufficient length more than 4 centimeters. Cauliflower, the length is less but many lobes. Cactus, one dominant central lobe with many secondary lobes. Cauliflower morphology predisposes to more thromboembolic complication. The incidence, the presence is chicken wing is more, 48%, but the risk is more with cauliflower. The ostium shape is also important for the cardiologist for choosing them for device closure. Different shapes, elliptical, triangular, round, even they say angel wing, horns, and parallel tubes. So these to be studied well before selecting the patients for this procedure. This is how is measured, all length, everything to be assessed in depth. So as I already told, while applying, placing the device, this should not be compromised, and also the submerger, the left superior pulmonary vein also should not be compromised. It's a properly placed device, and this is oscillating device. If it's a bigger ass, it's more than 28 mm, they have to go for some other device. So nutshell, it's a left atrium, it's a morphological left atrium, you should say. It's a posterior-most structure of the heart, forms most of the base of the heart. The shares the septum with the right atrium. The vestibule is the smooth walled part that's in close relation with the mitral valve. That's the outlet of the left atrium. The arch of the left atrial appendage is demarcated by that band, the left lateral ridge. It's also called the Coumadin and Marshall ridge. This separates the left atrial appendage from the left superior and inferior pulmonary veins. The posterior venous component receives the pulmonary vein drainage. Right superior pulmonary vein is closely related to SVC and the posterior aspect of the right atrium. Right pulmonary artery borders or overlies the roof of the left atrium. Left superior and inferior pulmonary veins in close relation to the left atrial appendage. The thinned left atrium in close to aorta and esophagus to be remembered while doing any procedures in the left atrium. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Dr. Jacob, once again for inviting me for this web seminar. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Rani. That was a very extensive and very useful talk about the left atrium. You become an expert on the left atrium. Thank you so much for joining us this time. Now I think we will go on to the next speaker. Dr. Sanjay Theodore is here to tell us about the mitral valve. Dr. Sanjay Theodore has been a long associate, and he is a regular feature of our cardiac morphology. He takes great pride in being with us, and we take great pride in having him here with us. And over to Sanjay Theodore, mitral valve.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Jacob, for having me here at this innovative meeting. My topic for today is the morphology of the mitral valve. The mitral valve has been likened to various shapes, and most often it is referred to as shaped like a bishop's mitre. However, I think it will be simple and easy to understand the mitral valve annulus as a saddle-shaped structure. The two lowest points of the saddle is at the trigones, and the two highest points are at the midpoints of the leaflet attachment. The annulus is a fibrofatty structure which has elastic properties and has an important role to play in the presystolic contraction of the mitral valve. The annulus is not circular. It is more oval in shape with the anteroposterior diameter shorter than the intercommissural diameter. There are two leaflets which attach to the annulus, the anterior and the posterior leaflets, and this is more accurately called the mural and aortic leaflets, but for simplicity's sake I'm going to keep using the terms anterior and posterior. The two leaflets are continuous at the two commissures, the anterolateral commissure which is closer to the aortic valve and the posteromedial commissure which is closer to the IVC. The leaflets have an attachment to the annulus, and the posterior leaflet has an attachment over 2/3 of the circumference, anterior leaflet over 1/3 of the circumference, and essentially they have an equal area. The height of the anterior leaflet differs between 2 to 2.2 centimeters and the posterior leaflet 1 to 1.2 centimeters. There are two prominent indentations on both the leaflets, dividing the leaflets into 3 unequal scallops. These indentations do not run up to the annulus. They stop short of the annulus and are very rarely the site of regurgitation in a healthy normal valve. The leaflets are further divided into 3 zones: the basal zones, the clear zone, and the rough zone. The basal zones are the zones closest to the annulus, and they contain small nerves and blood vessels and are continuous with the atrial and the ventricular myocardium. And they are sensitive to neurotransmitters and assist the annulus in the presystolic contraction. The clear zone, as the name implies, is clear, does not have any attachments, and is usually translucent. The rough zones give attachment to the cords, and these are found closest to the leaflet edges. The two leaflets come together and oppose each other and at a point called the coaptation point. And the height of the leaflets which are involved in this coaptation should be a minimum of 5 to 1 centimeters to have absolute competence of the valve. Now, when we study the morphology of any structure, it is important for us to understand the surrounding structures which could be critically injured in case of during surgery in difficult cases. So, around the mitral valve, we have the circumflex artery, the coronary sinus, the aortic leaflets, the AV node, and the bundle of his. Now, during a normal first-time mitral valve surgery, it's very unlikely that we're going to injure any of these structures. But when we have a small left atrium and an ischemic mitral regurgitation, or when we have a redo case or a small child, an overzealous bike can compromise any of these structures. Now, coming down below the leaflets, we have fibrofatty strands which arise from the papillary muscle heads and insert onto the rough zone of the valves. These fibrofatty strands with elastic properties are very important in maintaining the stability of the valve. There are between 15 to 20 cords in a normal valve. There are more cords arising from the posterior leaflet and less cords from the anterior leaflet. There are 3 different types of cords: the primary cords, the secondary cords, and the basal cords. The primary cords attach to the very edge of the leaflet and are very important to maintain the stability. Rupture or disease of any of these primary cords can cause flail leaflet and severe mitral regurgitation. There are 2 specialized primary cords, the commissural cords, which are fan-shaped and attach on adjoining parts of the leaflets. And these fan-shaped cords can be used for identification of a commissure in a severely fused rheumatic mitral valve. The secondary cords attach 5 millimeters behind the primary cords. And there are 2 sets of secondary cords which are stronger and thicker than the rest, and these are called the strut cords. And the integrity of these cords are very important to prevent prolapse of the leaflet into the left atrium and mitral regurgitation. The basal cords usually arise directly from the ventricular myocardium and attach to the basal portions of the posterior leaflet. These cords have clinical importance in ischemic mitral regurgitation, where they contribute to the tethering of the posterior leaflet. There is also a specific arrangement to these cords. It's very important to realize that the anterolateral papillary muscle gives cords which attach onto the A1 and the lateral part of A2 and P2. And the posteromedial papillary muscles gives cords to the P3, A3, and the medial part of P2 and A2. If during repair we cross any of the cords, it's highly likely that we are going to end up with an incompetent valve. Now, last but not the least, the papillary muscles and the ventricular wall. I'm not going to go too much into detail about these things because it will be covered later. But these are also an integral part of the mitral apparatus and are very important in both disease and in health. There are two papillary muscles, the anterolateral corresponding to the commissures. The anterolateral papillary muscle is usually very constant in its morphology and has a single head. The posterior posteromedial papillary muscle can be a little bit variable, and up to 3 heads can be found. And very rarely they can be very sessile and just come straight, the cords can arise straight off from the ventricular wall. And in disease, especially in ischemic mitral regurgitation, this papillary muscle and the left ventricular wall are the cause of mitral regurgitation. In understanding the morphology and the longevity and clinical significance of the mitral valve and the clinical interventions and treatments we can go ahead and palliate the patients, we need to understand the microscopic anatomy. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but basically the valve leaflets have 3 distinct layers: the atrialis, the spongiosa, and the fibrosa. The atrialis layer has elastin and collagen, which are arranged in a very specific manner, and these are very important in taking and reducing the strains developed in response to stress. The spongiosa layer has proteoglycans and glycosaminoglycans, and this is the shock layer of the mitral leaflet, which are useful in distributing the strains equally across the leaflet and reducing the strains developed at the maximum stress points. The fibrosa layer is the layer closest to the ventricle and bears the brunt of the ventricular stress and is the strongest part of the leaflet. There are 2 important cell types, the endothelial cells and the interstitial cells. The endothelial cells sense the stresses, and neurotransmitters and cytokines are produced. There is genetic upregulation in the valvular interstitial cells, and the valve is plastic. The term plasticity means that the valve leaflet is in a constant state of flux. Repair and regeneration takes place across the lifetime of an individual, maintaining the integrity of the valve. However, the best example would be to take the valve leaflet from a small child and older adult and look at the microscopic features, which will tell us why the valve is pliable and mobile in a child and more stiff and prone to degeneration in an older person. The young leaflet is going to be more cellular. The collagen arrangement is very defined. In an older individual, the number of cells reduces. The collagen is haphazardly arranged. There are areas of fibrosis and calcification. Now, it is also important that after looking at the basic morphology of the mitral valve, we need to know the morphological changes in a diseased valve. Only then we will be able to give a good palliation for the patient. The degenerative disease of the mitral valve is the commonest pathology found in this world and has a wide variety of diseases, starting from Barlow's disease to Marfan's, Ehlers-Danlos, and almost morphologically normal fibroelastic deficiency. So if you look at the basic anatomic and histological changes, there is an excess of glycosaminoglycans and proteoglycans, and the collagen fibers are haphazard, and there are fibrotic changes in the valves, leading to the valve leaflets becoming elongated, thickened, and more prone to prolapse. The annulus is also affected to a large extent, and the annulus is dilated and it loses its saddle shape. The subvalvular pathology is also present. The disease of the leaflets and the annulus is also present in the cords. The cords are frequently more elastic, elongated, and prone to rupture. Now, when we repair these valves or go in for any kind of treatment of these valves, it is important to identify the abnormal morphology. So here, the main things are the annulus is dilated, it loses its saddle shape, and the stability of the annulus, which helps in the valve stability, is lost. So the annulus has to be repaired. The important thing we need to understand when repairing the annulus in a degenerative valve is that we should never put a small ring, and we should never measure the area of the size of the ring using intertrigonal distance, because frequently this is distorted. So the anterior leaflet area is taken and the ring is measured, and it is frequently advised that one size bigger than the size measured is usually used. Second thing is, these valves, when successfully repaired, end up, so about 15 to 20 of them end up with severe systolic anterior motion. So the important things here is the elongated posterior leaflet should be reduced to a height of less than 1 centimeter. And the anterior leaflet coaptation point should be less than 2.5 centimeters from the septum. So basically the coaptation point should not move more anteriorly. It should stay posterior to prevent systolic anterior motion. The subvalvular apparatus, when it is elongated or causing significant prolapse, can be repaired with neocords, remembering that the neocord should not cross the midline. The second important pathology which we see in the mitral and abnormal pathology we should recognize is the ischemic MR. Ischemic MR is a very complex type of MR where there is various pathologies involved. There is a type 1 type of insufficiency where there is an annular dilatation and the loss of saddle shape and due to the increased sphericity of the failing ventricle. The second, there could be a type 2 type of insufficiency where there is caudal elongation, rupture or papillary muscle rupture. And the third, the most typical form of ischemic MR where you have a type 3A type where you have a tethering of the posterior leaflet. The tethering of the leaflet again is not very symmetric. So it is more towards the A3 and the medial part of A2 and P3 and P2. So you have an eccentric orifice. And when we have all these three pathologies in the same patient, it is going to be very difficult to repair, considering the fact that the patient is already very sick with a bad ventricle. So these patients will be best served by going in for a total caudal preservation and a mitral valve replacement. But when you can identify the pathology correctly, you can go ahead and repair. And especially with the new rings, which take into account the increased anteroposterior diameter and the eccentric orifice, we can come up with a successful repair. The third and the most common pathology seen in India and of course Asia is the rheumatic mitral disease. And the valve has, in all the components of the valve are involved. You can have fibrosis and contraction of the annulus. So generally the annulus is smaller in advanced stage. In the early stages of disease, after the first or second attack of rheumatic fever, you could have annular dilatation. And most often these valves have commissural fusion, various levels of fibrosis, stiffening, and in older individuals you will get fibrosis and calcification along the areas of maximum stress, that is the edge of the leaflets, commissures, and the annular area. So these valves are seldom repairable, and if we do try to repair it, we're going to do too much to the valve. And one of the basic things in a valve repair is less is more. The more procedures you do,